Hi everyone, Michael Britt here. Now, I'm very proud that the Psych Files podcast has been so successful. Recently, it passed the 20 million download mark. And a lot of that success is due to my episodes on how you can use proven memory strategies to remember just about anything, from memorizing terms for a test to remembering people's names at a party or a meeting, or even memorizing speeches. It's amazing how useful these strategies are. So I put all of these episodes into one audio course. In the most popular of these episodes, I talk about how to use images of hippos and llamas to improve your memory. So naturally, the course is called Hippos, Aliens, and Llamas: Quickly Master the Tricks to a Great Memory. I think you'll really enjoy the course, and it's available now on avid.fm. That's avid.fm. So find out what llamas can do for your memory by going to avid.fm/memorymaster. All one word. You're going to get a lot out of it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 336 of the Psych Files. Michael Britt here, and I wanted to bring you another interview with an author that I had on a little while back. His name is Steve Stewart Williams. He wrote the book called The Ape That Understood the Universe. Had him a little while back, as I say. In that episode, we talked about sex differences. So what, from an evolutionary psychologist's perspective, what can we say with some certainty about why the genders differ the way they do? So if you haven't listened to that episode, it is number 331. And then recently here in the U.S., we had another incident, a shooting, in which quite a number of people were killed. And so, and once again, it was a man who did it. And so it just kind of brought me back. I finished off the chapter about why violence is prevalent in the male of the species. Of course, it's not always, and that's sort of what's interesting. There are species in which this is not true. So I brought him back, asked him to come back and talk about this sex difference and why the male is always the one to commit these violent acts. And again, from a evolutionary psychology perspective, although we talk a little bit about the influence of culture, that kind of thing. And the publishers found it interesting too. So Cambridge University Press is going to give you a discount if you want to purchase the book. So there is a 20% discount code. And so what it is this code right here, APE20. That's APE20. So I'll have a link to where you can purchase it. It's actually, they've even created a little URL here. It's cambridge.org/ape that understood. And so I'll have a link on my site, but check that out. Get 20% off. And it really, really is an interesting book. And the foreword for the paperback version is by Michael Shermer. And I've mentioned him a number of times in this podcast. He's a lead skeptic and a writer. Written some great books. So if he endorses the book, yet another reason to go on out there and pick it up. All right, so cambridge.org/ape that understood. All right, so let's talk to the author, Steve Stewart Williams, and ask him the question that has been on my mind a lot, probably yours as well. Why is it that the male of the species, the human species, is the one to carry out these violent acts? All right, let's go to the interview. So it's great to have you back on the show. Our first episode was really interesting. You know, I contacted you. I continued to read your book, as I mentioned I would. Just found some more interesting things. My call to you or email to you, say, hey, let's talk again, was started by yet another violent incident here in the U.S. And, of course, now we have so many of them, sadly. It was committed by a man, and it goes back to just making me think about why is it always a man who commits these incidents? Is it culture, evolution? So you've got a whole section on that in your book. So let me just start, though, by asking you to just introduce yourself, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me back on the podcast. Yeah, my name is Steve Stewart Williams. I'm author of the book The Ape That Understood the Universe. Was born and raised in New Zealand. That's where my accent is from. I then lived in Canada for a few years, doing a postdoc with evolutionary psychologists Martin Daly and Margot Wilson. I then moved to Swansea University in Wales, spent about 6 years there, and I'm now at Nottingham University in Malaysia, and I've been here for around 6 years as well.
You have definitely gotten around in your career.
Yeah.
So what are the courses you teach then?
At the moment, I'm teaching one on the philosophy of mind and the philosophy of psychology. And the other big one I teach is a course on evolutionary psychology. And actually, a lot of the material from the book I first trialed in my course.
Right. The issue that that I spent some time on reading recently, and I actually just heard this yesterday from, I guess it was a sociologist. There was a discussion on some other podcast about whether or not the differences between males and females is due to culture, and that if we didn't raise men that way, the way we do, that they wouldn't be prone to violence. And you have a whole section on this where you mentioned that this socio-cultural explanation is deeply flawed. So I thought maybe could we start there and tell us why, because I'll bet you have a lot of students who come to your class and say, well, if we just raised men differently, we wouldn't see any differences at all between the genders.
Yeah, some folks do think that. And what I meant when I said that the sociocultural explanation is flawed, I didn't mean there are no sociocultural influences. What I was talking about really was the idea that we can explain the sex difference in aggression 100% in sociocultural terms. And I think that's not the case. I think that sociocultural factors are very, very important, but they're not the whole story. I think that there is a biological component to the story as well. So the idea that it's like 100% nurture, 0% nature, that's the thing that I think is flawed. I could tell you some of the reasons that I think that even though sociocultural factors are important, that there is a biological contribution as well. There are differences in the levels of violence across different cultures and across different times. We do have ways to lower levels of violence. But I don't think that could be the whole story for a number of reasons. One of the most important is that if you look across cultures, it's invariably the males that are more aggressive than the females. So there are no cultures where you find that actually similar numbers of homicides, for example, are perpetrated by females as by males. In every single culture, without exception, the vast majority of homicides are perpetrated by males. That the global average is something like 90 to 95%. And doesn't actually differ too much. Maybe 80% is about the smallest sex difference. 80% of the homicides perpetrated by males. But those kind of differences are smaller when you look at less extreme violence. But when it comes to direct violence, so physical violence or verbal violence, there does seem to be quite a strong cross-cultural trend that males, on average, do more of it than females do.
From a cultural perspective, you could say, yeah, that's because we encourage aggression. By the way, that's my cat in the background.
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah.
Because we encourage aggression across all cultures in males.
You could do, but then you'd think that if it were just a matter of culture, it would be surprising to have such a high level of uniformity. Now, you could argue that the level of uniformity is because in all cultures, there are some physical sex differences. So, for instance, males are bigger, they're stronger. And so maybe for that reason, every culture hits upon the idea of giving social roles that involve aggression, giving those to the males instead of the females, giving females roles associated, for instance, with childcare. And so you could argue that those social roles are not directly innate, they just follow on from the physical differences, but then they create the average difference in terms of aggression. I'm dubious about that for a number of reasons. One is that we know, but looking at the size difference, for instance, that is typically found in many, many species where the males are more aggressive than the females. The greater size, the greater muscularity, the thicker skulls, all these kind of things, all these physical traits males have that suggests that there's been selection for physical traits that make us more capable of combat and fighting. And it would be strange if natural selection shaped us physically in that kind of way, but just drew the line at our brains and didn't shape our brains as well. So that's one reason to sort of start doubting it. Another is that often cultures don't encourage male aggression. Often they discourage it quite strongly. And even when they do that, though, you do still find these persistent differences.
Yeah, I remember at one point in the book you said that we spend more time discouraging male aggression.
Yeah, it's a big problem for societies right around the world, what to do with young males, or rather with the minority of young males that are at the sort of extreme end of the distribution of aggressiveness. So often we are trying to contain them rather than trying to encourage them. We do some encouragement as well, and I'm sure that the encouragement and discouragement does have some effect. But another reason to think that it's not all down to cultural forces is that if it were all just down to cultural roles, like the ones that I was talking about, you would think that in cultures where you have stricter social roles, that you would actually find larger sex differences. And then in cultures where you have less strict social roles for the men and the women, you would find smaller sex differences. The strange thing is that for a lot of traits, aggression included, it actually seems to be the other way around. In cultures where they try to force males and females to act in certain ways, when they do that less in more gender egalitarian nations, a lot of sex differences actually become larger rather than smaller, which is the opposite of what you'd expect if it were down to social roles.
So just give me that again. You're saying that in some cultures where, well, let me just hear that again.
Yeah, it's kind of complex and it's kind of unexpected, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea that men's aggression comes out of social roles, it leads to a prediction. And the prediction is that where you have stricter social roles and sort of more patriarchal traditional social roles, you should find bigger sex differences in aggression. And then in cultures where it's more egalitarian and where the social roles for men and women are not nearly as strict or prescribed, you would expect to have smaller sex differences in aggression and other traits. And very often the correlation goes the other way, that the more gender egalitarian and gender equal that a society is, the more that sex differences start to appear. It's really strange, right? Very strange. So in a lot of Western cultures, people are a lot freer than in most cultures today and in most cultures historically to choose their own path through life. Mm-hmm. And when that is the case, it seems to be that sex differences are kind of amplified. It does seem to be the case that there is that relationship with greater egalitarianism corresponding to larger sex differences, which is inconsistent with the social role view. Right. Strange, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, you find this the sex difference in aggression. I guess two other lines of evidence. One is that prenatal testosterone levels seem to correlate with levels of rough and tumble play and aggression in young children and in adults within each sex. So girls and boys exposed to higher levels of testosterone in the womb tend to exhibit greater levels of violence later in life. And that's a causal factor that comes in before socialization begins. And then the final line of evidence would be the fact that in a lot of species, most species in fact, where the males are larger than the females also tend to be more aggressive.
Right. So once again, as you usually, when you think of evolutionary psychology, or just evolution in general, I guess you go, well, guess there's nothing we can do then. It's always going to be this way.
People often react that way. It's a shame because I think they're wrong when they jump to that conclusion, because the evidence that I just summarized is evidence that there's a biological push in a certain direction. But it's only that. It's a push in a certain direction, but we can push back. We may be successful to greater or lesser degrees, but it's not 100% biological any more than it's 100% sociological. And we actually have had quite a bit of success scaling down the levels of violence that we see in our species.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, we've made a lot of changes in the way that men behave, even in 40, 50 years, in terms of their traditional role. One of the quotes in this section that kind of stopped me was where you say that biologists define males as the sex that produces the smaller sex cells, and females as the one that produces larger ones. It's like, never thought about that before. I guess because, it's obviously true in humans. I haven't surveyed across the animal kingdom.
Yeah, that's the deep commonality across all animals in terms of how we decide whether they're male or female, because the traits associated with being male if you're a human, being female if you're a human, everything that allows us to identify male and female, there are some species where you don't find those traits. So the XX and the XY chromosomes, those are only found in mammals. It's a completely different system for other animals, for birds, for instance. But nonetheless, there are male and female birds. Sexual organs vary very, very widely across species. There's no universal male sexual organs or female sexual organs. The one thing they all have in common, by definition, is the gamete size and the fact that the smaller gamete producing sex is the male and the larger gamete producing sex is the female.
What implication does that have for behavior?
Well, it's quite important because that is the starting place for sex differences in what's called parental investment. Sex differences in parental investment give rise to sex differences in what's called the maximum offspring number. And that refers to the fact that males in many species, our own included, can have many more offspring potentially than females can. The males invest less in their offspring than do the females. And that's in a lot of ways, right? So among mammals, females invest more in terms of they're the ones that get pregnant, they're the ones that have to give birth, and they're the ones that have to nurse the young as well. The males don't have to do much lower. It's just the sex act. But that all ultimately traces back to the difference in the size of the sperm and the eggs. The only sex difference in parental investment was the sex difference in the size of the sex cells. And females invested more because they produced the larger ones. Males invested less because they produced the smaller ones.
Interesting. I never thought that one fact like that could be extrapolated into behavior.
It's fascinating, right? It does explain a lot. That was the starting point, the sex difference in gamete size and the size of the sex cells. That was the starting point. And when more elaborate forms of parental investment evolved, they tended more often to evolve in the females, just because the females had already started down the high investment path. So it was just easier to evolve them in the females rather than the males. And so for that reason, it's usually the females that invest more, and the males invest less. The males can therefore have many more offspring, and that's what creates a selection pressure for like a lot of the evolved sex differences that you see in our species and lots of species, including the sex difference in aggression.
Yeah, I remember in our last interviews, one of the questions you ask in the book is, how many offspring do you think is the most that a woman ever had? And I remember thinking that you asked the reader to guess, and I guessed like, I don't know, 20 or 30.
Yeah.
But the answer was, don't tell me, it was 67. Was it something like that?
It was 69. Yeah. Incredible, right?
Who was this person again? And
that was a Russian peasant woman. Her name was Valentina Vassiliev. And she probably had some kind of fertility disorder. She basically started having kids very, very young, and she finished having kids very, very late. And she had lots and lots of multiple births, lots of twins, triplets. I think she had some quadruplets as well. And it's quite exceptional. Do you remember the equivalent number for males? The maximum.
I think I do. Well, I won't know the exact number, but I think it was in the 800s.
It was in the 800s, yeah. So it's thought to be around 888. Actually, incredible, right? Give or take a few hundred, because the records are a bit sparse.
Yeah, right. How do you get?
Some people put a bit higher.
How do you find a record of someone?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the only people who were in the position to do that kind of thing were despotic leaders, and so often records were kept of their antics and their kids. And the record holder in that case is an individual by the name of Ismail the Bloodthirsty. So he had, and needless to say, there wasn't just one Mrs. Ismail the Bloodthirsty. He had a very large harem of wives and concubines, and many, many, many offspring.
It's funny, you'd think that someone who had 800 plus kids wouldn't be called Ishmael the Bloodthirsty, but I don't know.
It's not the ideal name for a dad, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. And let me just pause the interview there for very quickly, just to let you know again. Professor Stuart Williams has been so good about coming onto the show, giving a lot of time. And the book is really, really interesting. And so if you are interested in this topic, why are men violent? And the other one that we talked about previously, about male and female differences from an evolutionary psychologist's point of view, then this is the book to go to. Really, really interesting. And as I mentioned at the beginning, they'll give you a 20% discount if you purchase it using the code APE20. All right, that's APE20. So go to cambridge.com/ape that understood and check it out. I think you're going to really, really enjoy the book. And by the way, there's also an audiobook version available. So if you're listening to a podcast, then you can get this book in audiobook format, and you can get it from most places where you can purchase audiobooks. Okay, let's go back to the interview. All right, let's go to something I'm still a little confused about, and that was on page 104. You have an analogy, and I love analogies. So you said something about a pair of faders on a guitar or a radio, and I was reading it. I'm still a little bit lost. I think this has to do with violence again, getting back to that topic.
Yeah.
So can you?
Yeah, no worries. I'll explain that, yeah? The aim of it is to try to get people to think about sex differences and sex similarities in aggression without polarizing the differences. So I think often people just assume that the evolutionary view says that men are going to be really competitive and really aggressive. So it's a little thinking tool that I made up.
A thinking tool.
Yeah, it's a little thinking tool, and the aim is to get people to think about sex differences and sex similarities in competitiveness and aggression without exaggerating and polarizing those differences. So I think what people often assume is that the evolutionary view is that males are going to be hyper aggressive and hyper competitive and females are not. You do find that in some species, in elephant seals, for instance, but it's not always that way. So basically, the idea is that, and it's like the faders that you'd find on your sound system, the volume fader for turning up or down your sound system. So there are two faders. One represents the level of reproductive competition among males. The other fader represents the level of reproductive competition among females. And basically, each one spans from zero reproductive competition at one end and maximum reproductive competition at the other. So zero reproductive competition means that all the males, if it's the male fader, all the males had exactly the same number of offspring. And maximum reproductive competition would mean that one male has all the offspring and all the other males had no offspring. And likewise for females, so that for the females it can span from no reproductive competition, all the females have the same amount of offspring, maximum reproductive competition, one female has all the offspring, none of the other females have any. So that's what they represent. Now, there's no species in the entire world where either fader is set to either extreme for either sex, but they can vary quite a lot in between. So what you find in gorillas and elephant seals and deer, for instance, is that the fader for males is set to high reproductive competition. So they fight a lot for access to mates, and the ones that are successful in this, they have multiple mates and tons of offspring. And the ones that are not successful have very few offspring, and some of them even have no offspring at all. That's for the males. But then for the females in these species, basically all or most of them have offspring. So the fader for the females is set below reproductive competition. So that's the way that it is in a lot of species. Now, the important thing about the faders analogy is that it makes it clear that you can actually have different arrangements. So there are some species where the faders are set to low reproductive competition for both sexes. You find that, for instance, in a lot of pair bonding birds. Or both can be set reasonably high. So both sexes are competing among members of the same sex for access, sexual access to members of the other sex. Both sexes are competing. Sometimes you even get a reversal. So sometimes you find there's actually more reproductive competition among females than among males. And you find among jacanas, for instance, that the females are larger than the males and they actually fight each other to try to get as many males as they can. And a successful jacana female will have a bunch of different nests, and in each of its nests, it will have a different male that looks after its eggs while it goes out and looks for
one last thing. Remember to check
nest.
out my memory course.
How do you spell that little
these
species
strategies to
that-
get better
Jacana,
grades
so
on your
it's
tests,
Jacana.
to remember people's names, and even help you to
And
remember
they
those
are
jokes you keep
North
forgetting.
American wading
So
birds.
you will be amazed.
kidding. So it's
Avid.fm
completely opposite of
memory
our-
master.
Yeah.
It's avid,
Completely spun around.
AVID,
Even though in that
.fm
case, like
slash
others, the
memory
the
master.
female has the larger.
The largest sex cell, yeah,
Sex cell.
because she lays the eggs, so she produces the largest sex cell. But the thing is that it's one of the rare species where the overall level of parental investment is higher among the males. And that's because even though the gamete size is still larger among the females, the males are the ones that look after the eggs. And so they actually invest more into each individual offspring than the females. And that means that the females can have the maximum number of offspring for the females is actually higher than that for the males.
Interesting. Now, is that like with penguins? I thought I saw
Penguins are
The males
similar.
spend-
The males often look after the eggs, for instance, and there are various species where you see the males all clustered together, walking around in circles with the eggs on their feet, and throughout the winter they're looking after the eggs. They're not a sex role reverse species. Like a lot of birds are pair bonding and monomorphic because they both invest in the young to a pretty similar degree, and they take turns feeding the young and that kind of thing. A lot of birds do this, and what it means is because they both invest pretty similar levels into their young overall, there's relatively little in the way of sex differences. It's really quite hard for us to distinguish between male and female penguins, and a lot of birds are the same. They're very, very similar, the males and females.
Interesting. All right, but getting back to the faders thing. So I think I'm beginning to get what you're saying. So it's sort of like, well, there's two faders then, right? So each one has to do with the amount of violence in the gender. And so all the way to the left would be a species in which there is very little violence among either the males or the females.
Exactly.
And an example of that would be, you'd go back to birds on that, I think, right?
Yeah, some birds. And actually, in some cases, there is reproductive competition in pair bonding species, but it's similar levels of reproductive competition in both sexes. They are very, very similar to each other.
So there's very little difference in the amount of violence between the shown by each gender. And then if both if both go to the right, let's say, then both genders are equally violent or prone to aggression. It's funny.
Exactly.
The analogy, now that I get it, and then of course there's everything in between. I like the analogy more now that I understand it a little bit better, because it's funny. I was listening to another podcast, driving somewhere, and the person was trying to explain. It has something to do with false equivalences, but one of the things she said is that there's an amount of wrongness. Too often in our society, we think that if this person's wrong about that thing, and that person's wrong about that thing, well, then they're both wrong. And I think the person was trying to suggest that some things are more wrong than other things. For example, if you say that you think that the Earth is flat, well, that's really wrong. But if you thought that it was a perfect ball, well, that's wrong too. But that second one is a little closer to where we know the truth to be, which is the Earth is a bit of a sphere, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you find in your students, I'll bet that they go to the extremes.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And so that's closer than if you just thought there were no differences of this nature. But yeah, hopefully the fader analogy gets them a further few steps closer to a more accurate picture, and just captures the idea that there's so much variation between different species. At the same time, though, there are general trends, and it is a lot more common to find higher levels of reproductive competition among males than among females. And that again traces back to the fact that typically the females invest more in the young. Mm-hmm. And because they do that, it brings down the maximum number of offspring that the females can produce. And that means that the female fader can't really go as far away from reproductive equality as the male fader can. Males in many species invest quite a lot less. It's got a wider range. It can be low, but it can also go quite high as well, as it does for a lot of species.
So that's interesting. So it's sort of like the male fader can go up to 11. The female fader could, but is less likely to go that high.
Exactly. Because it might go to 2 or 3 or 4.
I see.
And the male fader usually doesn't go as high as 11, but it sometimes does. I think probably elephant seals would be a good example of where it goes up. It's pretty high.
Yes, so you use that. You talk about them. They must, it's like I didn't know they were the males were that violent.
They're very violent. They're massively larger than the females. They're about 3 or 4 times larger by weight than the females, and they are really, really mean and really prone to aggression. And basically, the reason for that is that aggression and violence just pays off a lot more for male elephant seals, bull elephant seals, in other words, than it does for the females. That's because the males, basically, if they're successful, they can monopolize like a harem of females. They can get 5 or 6 or maybe a dozen or even more females. And obviously, if they can successfully do that, they're going to have a very high number of offspring, more than any female could ever have. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have one male who has, say, 12 mates, that means that there are going to be 11 bachelor male elephant seals. Mm-hmm. And so there's reproductive competition among the males. So the bachelor males, they evolve to want to try to usurp the harems from the males that have them, the harem masters, they're called. And so the harem masters, I mean, they evolve to get big and mean and nasty and violent and strong in order to fight off anyone that might try to appropriate the harems that they've accumulated. And so that selects for these big, mean, violent males. The females, on the other hand, they can't have very, very high numbers of offspring, and violence just doesn't pay off for them. So if a female were to get into a fight to try to get access to the male, it'd be pointless, because basically the male is going to mate with all of the females eventually. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it would only be disadvantageous to to get into a fight in order to try to get to the male, because you could get hurt and harmed for no real advantage. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, high reproductive competition among the males, and they're very, very violent. Low reproductive competition among the females, and they are much less violent.
And do we ever see, among the quote-unquote unsuccessful males, do they ever take on any other role once it's clear that they're not going to be the harem master?
As far as I know, you don't see that. You do see that in some other species where you find like uncles investing in nieces and nephews. You find that quite commonly in birds, for instance, until they can have a pair bond of their own. But as far as I know, you don't find that in elephant seals, because they're just designed to fight, basically. Fight and mate. Where do humans fit into this picture? And I think that we're certainly not like elephant seals. So males are more violent on average than females, but not to the degree that you see it in elephant seals. I think the reason for that is that the male fader is set closer to reproductive equality for humans than it is for bull elephant seals. The reason I think for that is that we typically form pair bonds. And typically, in the context of a pair bond, males often invest in their young as well. We're pretty atypical among the mammals, and that the males often invest in the young as well. And where that's the case, that lowers the maximum number of offspring that males can produce, Ismail the bloodthirsty notwithstanding. And for that reason, it pulls the male fader closer to reproductive equality. And although you do find male-male combat in our species, human males are kind of peace-loving hippies compared to bull elephants. Okay. And meanwhile, you also, with the females, you do find maybe more competition, reproductive competition, than you would expect in a lot of female mammals. And that's perhaps also related to the fact that because males invest, it suddenly becomes important for females to compete among themselves to get the best investors, the best males. And so you have a higher level of reproductive competition among females than you find among, for instance, female bull elephant seals. Nonetheless, you do still find a sex difference. So there is more reproductive variance among males. There are some males who have more offspring than any females do. And wherever that's the case, you do find males tend to be bigger, at least among mammals. You find males are more aggressive. You find that males are more interested in casual sex and no strings attached, sexual liaisons. All these kind of differences all come in and cluster together. So we find that in our species. We are dimorphic, but we're a lot less dimorphic than is the case for elephant seals.
So the male fader might go to, in humans, 6 or something like that?
Yeah.
Females 4?
That sounds about right, yeah. Oh. So the sex differences are there, and I do think that is why men are overrepresented when it comes to violence in general and shooting in particular. Yeah. Not that it's especially common, but just among the minority who do that kind of things, because of this average sex difference, there are more men than women at those extremes.
And don't some of your students ever say, well, that just reduces me to just the result of genes and evolution? Does it take away some of the grandeur of being human?
I mean, I guess sometimes I have that reaction as well, right? And I say a few things about that. One is that even if it really did take away some of the grandeur of being human, it doesn't mean it's not true, right? So like the world is under no obligation to be pleasing to us. But I would also say actually that I don't think that it does take away the grandeur of being human, right? I think that it explains some things. The evolutionary explanations are never the whole story. They're part of a very, very complex causal story that includes non-evolutionary stuff as well. And people are pretty great, even if we did come about through this process of natural selection.
Right. Very interesting. Really appreciate your time. This has been yet another exploration of your book, which I'm just obviously a huge fan of. The Ape That Understood the Universe. Very interesting title. And the cover is kind of neat, too. It sort of looks like something out of 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Did you know there's an audiobook version of it out?
Oh, now. Did you? I think you mentioned you were going to do that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's come to fruition. And also there's a paperback copy of the book coming out in November as well. It's got a foreword by Michael Shermer, no less.
Oh, no kidding. Michael Shermer,
Yeah.
the skeptic guy.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, well, that I got to read.
Yeah,
But you're saying,
yes.
so there's a paperback version of the small one?
Yeah.
Well, I wish you a lot of luck. Really fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael.
Yeah. Fascinating book. Really has
thanks
given
to
me
you.
a lot to
Thanks,
think
Mike.
about. Okay. Take care then.
All the best, Michael.
That's it from me, and I'll see you next time on the Psych Files. Take care.